Mr Chair, I rise to take a call on this bill, which we will not be supporting in this House. It is a bill that takes us backwards rather than forward. This is a bill put forward by a government that is clearly out of touch. In a time of widening inequalities, we have here removal of facilities for those who are most in need. Instead, it seems to be a government that is distracted by doing deals with cronies. I recently attended the Salvation Army report launch for the report Give Me Shelter, an assessment of New Zealand's housing assistance policies. And that report just out shows that the government has been dropping down its capital contributions to Housing New Zealand and upping its dividends. And if I can quote, it found between 2002 and 2012, over the 7 years of its oversight, the Labour-led government provided Housing New Zealand with $758 million in capital contributions and received $272 million in dividends, leaving a net $486 million in funds in the corporation. Over the 3 years of its oversight, the National-led government has provided the corporation with $129 million in capital contributions, receiving $271 million in dividends, resulting in a net $142 million withdrawal of funds from the organisation. I think those following the debate at home on the wireless or on the television will see the pattern here. We have a Labour government that was investing in supporting those most in need, and we have a national government that is pulling the rug out, quite literally, from under families who are struggling in this difficult time, who are enduring the national government. One of the other points that was made in that report was that the real value of benefits, as it drops relative to the cost of living, has made housing so much more unaffordable for the most vulnerable members of our society. There are an extensive array of charts and tables in the back of that very detailed assessment, and I recommend that any who are interested and who are following this debate get a copy of the Salvation Army report, Give Me Shelter. It is damning, and it does ask for a really major rethink of housing policy, particularly social housing in this country, and that is a fair thing to call for. I mean, this bill clearly is designed to fulfil National's vision of a contestable market. Of that there can be little doubt for social housing. Labor doesn't share the view that the government should just be one player amongst many. We have a view that the expansion of community sector social housing is a core function of the state. The government should not duck its responsibilities in this area. And in fact, in part, this tinkering, this cutting and chopping here and there and everywhere is symbolic of a government that has failed to manage the economy effectively and is looking at ways to chop the pie up differently and attribute even smaller parts to those who need it most. The bill itself, of course, was a rushed mess. The SOP here, 390, is a fairly thick document. I think anyone watching on their television at home will be able to see. And I note, even on the table in the middle here, the original bill hasn't been supplied because in the rushed rewrite, most of the content is provided. It's no longer worth reading the original bill. This has been a messy process, and that speaks to the ad hoc nature of the bill, the lack of an overarching vision for social housing. And 5 years of a lack of vision have seen state housing decline. I note also in the regulatory impact statement on the social housing reform program that there are some key lines here removed. But just above those removed lines, under the heading Limitations on the Analysis Undertaken, it says, without decisions on the specific components of the final framework, the analysis that can be undertaken by officials is constrained. Right up front in the regulatory impact statement we've been supplied with is an admission that the analysis of it is constrained, and that, then we learn, was followed by a complete rewrite of the bill. This is a shambles. This is not how good policy is made. This is not how visionary policy is made. This is the work, my colleague says, of Nick Calamity Smith. The parts that have been removed immediately after the admission of constraint are protected under the Official Information Act, Mr Chair.
David Clark.
Mr Chair, under the Official Information Act 1982, sections 9 to F4. And anyone who has redacted documents as an official will know that that is the clause protecting ministers' confidentiality. So basically it's the clause that says you can't know because we're not going to tell you. It's that wonderful thing in the Official Information Act that says, well, ministers might still be making decisions on these things, but anyway, we're not going to tell you what the details are of what they are considering. And so not only do we have a constrained analysis of a bill that was then completely rewritten, then we have the detail of what's still going on withheld from the public and withheld from the members of Parliament who must debate the bill. So this all points to a shambles of a process. It says that the government really doesn't have an idea what it is going to do with social housing, but the one thing that is clear is that it is going to try and pull back expenditure so that it can afford more generous deals in other areas it's interested in, and we think immediately of the corporate welfare for Sky City, the Rio Tinto corporate welfare where there wasn't even a jobs guarantee asked for, and what looks like an imminent handout to Chorus. The government's very keen and quick to support corporate players that are struggling, but somewhat more reticent when it comes to the individuals at the bottom of the heap who are struggling the most. In this regulatory impact statement, we also find on page 3 some interesting analysis. The problem definition says that a range of problems exist with the current market for social housing in New Zealand, including 1. State housing is not well matched to need. 2. There is a lack of alternatives to state housing that offer security of tenure and affordability. 3. The government financial assistance for housing is inequitable. 4. Increasing demand is likely to create fiscal pressures in the future and may be difficult to manage under the current state provider model. Now, there are 4 issues raised here. The government seems only focused on dealing with the 4th one. It seems to want to get there as quickly as it can to cut costs where it is delivering services to the most vulnerable, obviously, as I've said, so that it can put more money the way of those who are already at the top of the heap. But it is not addressing the other 3 problems that are clearly identified, 1, 2 and 3. State housing is not well matched to need, a lack of alternatives to state housing that offers security of tenure and affordability, and government financial assistance being inequitable. Those are all problems identified by the government's own officials that are not adequately addressed in this legislation. This is a government that's tinkering, that is not making the real change that's needed to provide secure housing for our most vulnerable citizens. It's a government that has over 9,000 properties, 14% of the state housing portfolio vacant or underutilised or overcrowded. This is just a shambles. And the minister must stand up and explain why he is doing this higgledy-piggledy approach. Is he being stymied by a cabinet that has other priorities? Is it the case that he's getting around to dealing with things, or is it just that he is incompetent? This bill takes New Zealand nowhere except backwards. It removes security for those who are most vulnerable, and it does not outline a vision of a better New Zealand that we would all hope for, the kind of vision that Labour is presenting with its Kiwi Build program, with affordable power prices and the like, a future that works for all New Zealanders, a fair and just society where all live in dignity, an environment we can protect, and a nation that we can all be proud of. Instead, this bill takes us backwards. It's a sign of a government that's out of touch, that's not in touch with the widening inequalities, that's arrogant and not listening to New Zealanders. This bill needs to be voted down, and I urge the government to reconsider its options, present a decent policy that we could own across the House, one that looks out for those most in need, that addresses the policy problems identified by its own officials, and that is actually a step forward for New Zealanders.
Sue Moroney.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak in this debate on the Social Housing Reform Amendment Bill. Because, Mr Chair, here we are again. We are in urgency. I think that just about says it all, really. Pushing this through in urgency. And I think nothing more actually describes how chaotic this government's approach is to social housing than the fact that my colleague who just took his seat, Dr David Clark, is absolutely right. The government is in complete chaos when it comes to actually, A, understanding the housing needs of New Zealanders, and B, identifying the right solution to fix the problem. And here in part one, they demonstrably get it wrong. They absolutely get it wrong, because Nick Smith, the Minister, made a big deal before about being concerned about the 4,000 New Zealanders who are lucky enough, I'd have to say, under this government, to have made it onto the waiting list for Housing New Zealand properties. Well, if the Minister was genuinely concerned